Over the course of 8 months last year, I lived in my RV and traveled across the continent. This incident occurred in the first month of my journey. I was camping outside of Alaska, at the Yukon border in the woods, about a mile off the main road. It was summer, so most of the snow had already melted, and the scenery was breathtaking. By then, I had been there for about a week, and there were several consecutive days of alternating rain. My RV was parked in an open field with trees around it, but not covering it from the rain, so I spent most of the time inside the RV. I read and looked out the window or just listened to music and thought. The place was very calming. However, one of those few days while I was cooking lunch, I heard a rustling sound coming from the rain. I stopped what I was doing and listened, thinking it could be a bear smelling the food I was cooking. However, as the sound got closer, it became clearer footsteps. The footsteps approached, making me nervous, so I drew the curtains aside and looked. But as they got closer, they turned around and left. After a while, I peeked out from the curtain and saw the back of a man walking away into the woods. I couldn't see him clearly because the rain obstructed my view, but I could see that he didn't live there, or at least not without a van or RV. He wasn't carrying a backpack or anything indicating he was camping or hiking. Why was he here, in the middle of nowhere by the roadside, made me worried, unless by chance he stumbled upon my spot. I checked a few times throughout that day but didn't see anything suspicious again. When night fell, the rain became heavier, and some lightning started to appear. I prepared the RV to ensure everything was sealed properly. It was the first time I experienced heavy rain while not parked in the usual spot, so I was somewhat worried. I stayed up longer than usual to make sure everything was okay. A few hours into the night, I heard footsteps approaching again along with the rain. I only heard them when they were already very close. They went straight to the door, and then the footsteps stopped. I waited, staring at the door for a few minutes, but there was no sound anymore. I slowly approached the door and looked through the curtains. There was no one there. I looked out into the trees and even checked other windows, but it was as if I had just imagined it all. After staying awake for another hour, I assumed that's what happened. I finally fell asleep, trying to keep my mind clear from whatever it was. The next morning, I woke up and went about my usual morning routine. The rain was now lighter, giving me a chance to go out and explore. But when I opened the door, I saw something strange. Footprints right where I heard footsteps last night. Knowing that I didn't imagine it, my face paled. I looked beside the footprints and saw the grass flattened right beneath my RV's bed. I closed the door loudly, grabbed my keys, didn't even prepare the cabin before leaving. As I pulled out, I saw a figure lying in the grass exactly where I parked my RV. I left and kept driving far from there. How they found me and what they planned, it's something I'm not sure of. If I had to guess, I think they definitely followed me from the road and might have been spying on me during the week I was there. I was very lucky because if something happened in such a remote place, I surely would never have been found. It was a weekend night, and my parents went out of town for a few days, so I invited my friend Matthew to stay overnight at home. We are both 14 years old, so having a night without parents around was too good to pass up. Matthew came over at 8 o'clock, walking across the street in a storm that had started since noon. As I let Matthew in, he was soaking wet. I guess neither of us realized how heavy the rain was pouring. He quickly changed into dry clothes, and we immediately turned on the Xbox. We played various games for the next 5 hours without any plans to stop anytime soon. We even discussed staying up all night and playing games until morning. But while playing one of our games, we suddenly heard knocks on the back door. Loud knocks, like someone was banging on the door. Matthew and I looked at each other, indicating that we both didn't know who it was or why there was someone at the back door. We both stayed in the living room and didn't move, not wanting anyone outside to see us. Someone called for help, their voice muffled by the rain. We were both too skeptical and scared to even let that person see us. But we were also hesitant to call the police without knowing who they were or why they were there. I guess, for some reason, we thought we would get into big trouble if we called the police, and it turned out to be nothing. We agreed that one of us should go through the kitchen and see who it was. Our kitchen is on the left side of the house and the back door is in the middle, so the plan was to see them without being seen. I took the initiative and sneaked over there, tilting only my head from behind the wall and looking towards the door. The knocks suddenly stopped, and they stopped asking for help. Outside was foggy, dark, and rainy, but through it, I could make out the outline of a large figure right near the door, but I couldn't see their facial features or even recognize their direction. I returned to Matthew and told him what I saw. However, during our conversation, we realized we hadn't heard anything for a while. I went to the kitchen and checked again, but this time there was no one there. We listened for signs of their presence for the next 10 minutes, but eventually went back to playing games. I guess we chalked it up to a mistake or something else. I don't know, but then again, we're still very young and anxious about calling the police over something we doubt. We played for another 15 minutes, but it didn't feel as fun as before, so we decided it was better to stop and just watch TV before going to sleep. I stood up and turned to grab the remote, and I was startled by a pair of sharp eyes staring at me through the window. His face was almost pressed against the glass with rain streaming over his long hair, and his eyes wide open looked like he was crazy. I was shocked, but Matthew must have turned around too because he screamed and started running to the other side of the house, and I followed him. We both heard several thuds on the window as if he was trying to open it or something, but then it went quiet. Matthew called his parents, who then called the police for us, but by then it was all over. The officers found some muddy shoe prints outside the house, which made us, Matthew and I, feel relieved knowing that they trusted us. But we were both still scared. Anyone could have stood outside the window and spied on us for almost 30 minutes. The thought still sends shivers down my spine just thinking about it. The man was never identified, but he never came back either. What would happen if we tried to help him would probably not be good. I just hope no one else falls into his trap or makes the same mistake we made that almost threatened our lives. I work as a security guard for a small warehouse in my town. It's a night job that's not ideal, but the pay is decent compared to other similar jobs. Although the warehouse itself isn't particularly large or impressive, the company that owns it sells expensive technology goods, so I guess it's important to have the building under 24-hour surveillance. My job is nothing more than monitoring cameras, patrolling, and rarely filling out reports. That night it was pouring rain with occasional thunder as well. Honestly, although the atmosphere was somewhat eerie, nights like these made me feel more relaxed knowing that no one would be out and about. I clocked in and talked to the closing shift workers as they left, leaving the warehouse to myself from 10:30 p.m. until 6 a.m. Normally the building was very quiet with just a few creaks, but with the rain pouring heavily on the roof, it was almost impossible to hear anything else. About 2 hours later, I took a brief break from staring at camera recordings and stood up to walk around the building for a routine security check. I walked to the far end where most of the actual storage parts of the warehouse were located, then started walking towards the other end, but a soft beep began echoing through the hallways. It was an alert coming from the security room. I briskly walked over and checked it, seeing that it was a lock sensor on the back door indicating someone was trying to open it. I pulled up the live camera feed covering that door, but there was no one out there. After a few minutes, I went to the back door myself to check it out, thinking maybe the sensor was malfunctioning or the rain had disrupted something. I disabled the alarm and opened the door, then looked around, seeing nothing else but an empty alley behind the warehouse. There was nothing strange about the door itself. I'm no expert in that, but I tried testing it, and it never failed to detect the lock. I looked around once more before closing and locking it. Unfortunately, although I didn't see anyone or anything, I still had to make a full report about the incident, because the alarm appeared in the system. So I returned to the security office and started filling out the forms. Just a few minutes later, banging sounds echoed throughout the building. I jumped and stared down the hallway, unsure exactly where the sound was coming from or what it was. I left the room and stood in the hallway listening for any other noises, but didn't hear anything except the rain falling on the roof. I walked cautiously across the building, looking at shelves to see if any boxes had fallen or if there was any noticeable damage. But as I got closer to the front of the building, the sound of rain started to get louder. I turned a corner and stopped dead in my tracks as I saw across the warehouse, its front door wide open, and on the floor I could see the reflection of puddles, possibly from someone who had entered the building. I ran back and locked myself in the room, hitting the emergency button to immediately contact the police. While I waited, I heard a few thuds from inside the building, and then remained quiet until the police arrived. I waited outside and gave a report to one of the officers while two others searched the warehouse. A few minutes later, they returned with a man in handcuffs. They said he was hiding behind some boxes in the storage area with a hammer in his hand, and as he passed by me, he gave me a cold stare that sent shivers down my spine. A few days later, the police reported that the man seemed to be under the influence of drugs and gave no reason for his actions. It was unclear what he intended to do, but he was hiding with a hammer in his hand after forcing his way in, and because he was so intoxicated, it couldn't be determined what he might have done. Luckily, he's still behind bars, and I no longer work late nights in that creepy warehouse, but that night still left a chilling feeling on me, especially on rainy nights when I couldn't see or hear my surroundings.